Francesca, you can see fine, right?
No problem, perfect.
Okay. So look, if this doesn't work, I have 2 people here and there's another 4 people we know that like to come online, we'll figure out whether we should be making photocopies of my text and scanning them and putting them online and then moving through the scanned documents online, or whether we should be using this live Talmud site that we've been using and everyone in place can do it. Safaria, what we're doing right now, is by far the easiest thing to do because it doesn't involve photocopying and it doesn't involve scanning and it doesn't involve uploading the scans of the photocopies.
A lot less work and saves lots of trees.
Yeah, can't you print this section of Safari we're going to do?
So I don't know how far in Safaria we're going to go, and I don't know, I can't just print from Safaria, I don't think. I think I would have to like block, cut, and paste into another document, and then print that. But I don't ever know how far we're going to get.
Yeah, but we just do a good section.
Yeah, Ron said
I'll think of something, I'll send you.
He'll figure it out.
Okay?
Yeah, because you can always.
We're on 46B. Why don't you print from home what you think you'll need in the next class? We'll make you the guinea pig.
Okay.
And if you wind up with papers that work, then email me whatever papers you have and
PDF file.
yeah, and then we'll print whatever you say, okay? We can certainly do that. Okay, so here we are in a very weird world. I have 2 microphones aimed at me and a projector and a screen, and
I don't think you need the mic. You have.
I need the microphone for the online sound because it gives better sound. And once I have the mask on, I'm very muffled. So we need to make sure the microphone is good for the sound. So this microphone is for that speaker. This microphone is for the computer. Yeah, I don't need the microphone for the speaker, but we need the speaker for the online people to be a part of the class. Okay, so when last we met, we were talking about hanging executed people up on poles and then taking them down and burying them with or without the pole. And the concept was that we had this command in Deuteronomy, kavortik berenu, which repeats the root kever, meaning to bury, twice, which is a normal grammatical form, but for the rabbis it's an invitation to interpret. And so they were trying to learn all kinds of things from that. One of the things they learned was, you shall bury him with the pole. One of the things they learned was, you have to put him on a pole. One of the things that they learned is, there is a mitzvah for burial. And all of that played into rabbinic logic about whether or not a certain interpretation of a word was available to you or not to try and prove a point. In the middle of all that, we had the appearance of King Shapur of Persia, who evidently was asking the rabbis, why do you have to bury in the ground? And I hypothesized that there may have actually been a legal conflict or contact between the non-Jewish authorities and the Jewish authorities about proper mode of burial. So, and the reason this is in my mind is I've lived and done burials now as a rabbi in the state of Maryland, in the state of Connecticut, in the state of Kansas, and the state of New Jersey. And there are civil laws regarding burial that are different from state to state to state. So, for example, in Kansas, it is illegal to bury without a vault. A vault. A box that goes into the ground, and then the coffin goes into the box. Okay? Connecticut has that as well. So there are some older cemeteries that ignore that, and they just put the coffin in the ground, and I think it's just one of these classic things that nobody's looking, nobody cares. But the law is there, and some of the cemeteries enforce the law. And then the question is, can a Jew be buried in a vault? And the answer is supposed to be no, because you're supposed to be buried in the ground. The whole point of the vault is to stop the coffin from desiccating and leaching into the ground and into the groundwater. Why? Because most bodies that go into the ground have also been embalmed or something like that. So you have chemicals that are in the bodies that are now in the ground, which then leaches into the groundwater. It's all disgusting. Also, if you have a large number of rotting bodies in the same field, that will just naturally throw off the chemical nature and the pH and other things of what's leaching into the groundwater. And again, you could wind up with soil full of desiccating flesh and bacteria, which is affecting groundwater, well water, what have you. So there are laws, there are environmental protection laws around burial, and in some states they say if you put a vault in there and then the body goes in, it's protected and whatever happens to the body doesn't affect the ground around it, which is the exact opposite of the Jewish view of burial, which is you are supposed to go back into the earth so that you will desiccate and break down and leach out into the earth. The whole point is that your body has one last positive thing it can do, and that is to nourish the soil, right? We're going to go back to the dust from which we came. So obviously the vault is contrary to that idea. And you could say, well, what's the difference between a vault in the ground and a vault above the ground? Well, a vault above the ground is a mausoleum. Oh, God, traditional Jews know that traditionally you can't be buried in a mausoleum. But if you're in an underground mausoleum, why is that different than an above ground mausoleum? So should we allow that in the ground at all? The way they get around it, if you want to get around it, is two ways. One, large holes in the vault, allowing the contact of the earth in the vault and the earth under the vault to come together. So you bury by shoveling dirt into the vault, and at some point they close the lid on the vault, and then you continue shoveling to cover that up to the surface. So you buried the person in the vault in the earth, and the holes in the vault connect that earth to the earth outside the vault, and therefore you've buried in the ground. Convoluted, not my favorite. The other thing is you simply make the vault out of something that is earth, like concrete. Concrete is just hard earth. There's nothing artificial about it. There's no metal or anything. So what they do is they make concrete vaults with holes in them, and then they paint them shiny silver or shiny gold or, different price points for the color paint on it, and you wind up getting a vault that looks like a fancy gold vault, but it's halachically correct. So my only point is that the civil authorities care about burial and do in almost every empire that we've ever had, either for theological reasons, political reasons, economic reasons, or now environmental reasons. And Judaism bumps up against that. So when I see a story of King Shapur of Persia saying, why are you burying in the ground? And I see archaeology from Persia in that period with mausoleums above the ground for important people, I wonder if that was actually a conversation. Yeah?
Go over the idea of why we add dirt from Israel to the...
Right. So for $5 or whatever it is, you can get a little packet of earth from the land of Israel, and you can pour it into the grave when you're burying. This is slightly better than a red thread, in my view. The concept is that when we are resurrected into the land of Israel. We are resurrected from the ground, from the land of Israel. And so then there's legends and midrashim. Well, what about the people buried outside the land of Israel? How will they be resurrected if they're not buried in the land of Israel? And either that's a problem, so nobody gets resurrected out here, which of course none of the Orthodox communities of Europe or anywhere else would ever accept, that their righteous rabbi would not get resurrected. That's not acceptable. So then you have these midrash about underground tunnels from the graves going up and coming out in Israel, and everybody actually was buried here, but they'll come out in Israel. And then related to that, people are like, but if you can be buried in the land of Israel, that's better. And so some smarty came up with the idea of burying them in the land of Israel here, by putting earth from the land of Israel in their grave. Now, as a symbol of our devotion to Zionism, I like it. As a symbol of our hope for resurrection in the world to, with a world to come, I like it. as a literal belief that if you have this in there as opposed to if you don't, you will have a different outcome, that I hate. But you know me well enough to know that I was going to hate that. But you'll find people who believe all these things. Okay? Yes. Tashma. So, now we have a teaching. So we're going to go to the book of Kings, chapter 14, and we're going to deal with another tradition having to do with burials and so forth, and we'll see where it takes us. So we were just dealing with whether or not burial is a mitzvah in the Torah. And remember we said he could have argued Abraham, and somebody could have argued it's just a custom, and he could have, right? And so we left it at that. And now we're going to go to the Tashma, learn on this topic. Yes?
Another point over here. What do we deal with the idea of Yosef and the idea of how they have...
Yosef being embalmed and how bad that is?
And then they have to bring him to Israel and then...
Yosef... There's a lot of commentary on Yosef being embalmed, being then taken back, his bones being taken back, and the bones having to be buried. How do they deal with that? They deal with that in the fact that that's what the Torah says they did. Most of the time, they will not endorse what happened to Yosef. That the embalming is something simply that they did, not something that we wanted. What Yosef wanted was that his bones would be buried back in the family plot at the cave of Machpelah or somewhere like that in the land of Israel. That's what Yosef wanted, and that was a righteous question. So that's the basis, for example, people who want a body to be buried in Israel today, there's two ways that happens. One is they die and the memorial is here and then the body is shipped and it's just buried. There are other cases, however, where people are actually exhumed from here and their bodies are moved there. Halachically, that's much more difficult to do. We don't like to disturb resting places, but for the purpose of burial in the land of Israel, there's a leniency, and it's based on Yosef. Okay? All right, Tashma, can you read well enough to read? Can you read that?
I think it's difficult.
Francesca can read. Francesca, do you want to read? You're muted, Francesca.
I didn't know which you were referring to. Sorry about that. The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof that burying the dead is a mitzvah. As the prophet, how do you say that?
Achiyah.
How?
Achiyah.
Oh, I guessed right. Achiyah, the Shilonite, said about Abicha, son of Jeroboam, I don't know. And all Israel shall eulogize him and bury him. The Gemara answers, from here too there is no proof, as they may have buried Abicha in order not to deviate from the general custom of the world, not because they were required to do so.
Okay, so again, the question is pretty straightforward. Do we have a biblical source that burial is required by the Torah or by the Tanakh? We've gotten out of the Torah, we're into Nevi'im now, which is usually not a stronger argument, it's usually a weaker argument. And they say we have a case in the Nevi'im where it says Israel shall eulogize and bury him. That's proof that we are required to bury. Well, the answer is it's not proof, it's just saying that they did it. It might have been a custom. Not, just because Rebecca watered this guy's camels doesn't mean that every woman is required as a mitzvah to water people's camels. Lots of things happen in the Torah and the Nevi'im that are not mitzvot. Right? They're good things, but they're not mitzvot. So, it could have just been the general custom. So now we're going to go farther. Now, not just Kings, we're going to go to Jeremiah. So go ahead.
The Gemara proposes another proof. Jeremiah pronounced a curse upon the wicked, saying, they shall not be eulogized, nor shall they be buried, but they shall be as dung upon the face of the earth.
Okay.
Does that mean just letting them rot in the ground without
Correct.
burying them underneath?
So the commentary here is going to explain the interpretation. The idea is, so you had a verse that said it positively. A good person is going to be eulogized and buried. And the answer is that doesn't teach anything. Maybe it's just something that they did in that case. Well, then we have a negative verse that says, if you're a bad person, I won't let them bury you, from which you could assume that the presumption is you are supposed to bury people. That's actually a stronger argument, the negative. Like, if you're bad, I will withhold this from you, could really teach it's supposed to be something that's done to you. Go ahead and read the commentary, which proves?
Which proves that when no curse has been pronounced, the dead should be buried. The Gemara rejects this proof. From here, too, there is no proof that it is a mitzvah to bury the dead, as Jeremiah cursed the wicked, saying that they would deviate from the general custom and not be buried. Due to all these difficulties, Rav Hama was unable to adduce incontrovertible proof that there is a mitzvah to bury the dead.
Right, so all of this is meant to save Rav Hama, because Rav Hama didn't answer King Shapur when King Shapur said, prove to me that it's commanded. And Rav Hama couldn't prove it. And remember, later on, the commentary from a later rabbi was, he's an idiot. Right? Like, the world is run by idiots. How can you not come up with a proof that burial in the Torah is commanded? Right? So from all these different verses, we could still argue every step of the way. It doesn't matter if people expected it. Right? It doesn't matter what people expect. People expect there to be tuna fish and egg salad at the Kiddush. And if you don't do tuna fish and egg salad at the Kiddush, you're going to hear it from everybody. How can you have a Shabbos meal without tuna fish and egg salad? Right?
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that it's in the Torah that you're supposed to have tuna fish and egg salad. Doesn't matter how many expectations people have. It doesn't matter how ingrained the behavior is. That doesn't prove that it's a mitzvah. Okay? All right, y'all like that one, huh?
So
All
what
right.
about Hever Kadisha? Is that from the Torah as well?
Well, if we can prove that burial is commanded, then the acts associated with Hever Kadisha would also be commanded, because that's what it takes to have a legitimate burial. Right? So we're not there yet. Hold on to that.
Okay.
Okay, that means?
A dilemma was raised before the sages. Is burial obligatory on account of disgrace, so that the deceased should not suffer the disgrace of being left exposed as his body begins to decompose? Or is it on account of atonement, so that the deceased will achieve atonement by being returned to the ground from which he was formed?
Interesting. The Gemara has inserted here the concept of disgrace, which we certainly would have read from Jeremiah, the quote in the last passage, very easily. Leaving a body out on top of the earth is certainly a disgrace. It's something that's done to people you're cursing, etc. But there's this other concept now that burial in the ground is a form of kapara, like Yom Kippur. It's a form of atonement. That your sins are forgiven as you are placed in the earth. That your burial into the ground is some form of atonement. It's a very interesting concept. It comes out of the blue here. So let's see what we've got. The Gemara asks.
Gemara asks, what is the practical difference that arises from knowing the reason that burial is necessary?
Right. So who cares if burial is a mitzvah? We know we're all going to do it. Right? So what's the practical difference if it is or isn't a mitzvah? Right? Okay?
The Gemara answers, there is a difference in a case where one said before he died, I do not want them to bury that man, myself. If you say that burial is required on account of disgrace, it is not in his power to waive his own burial, as his family shares in the disgrace. But if you say that burial is required on account of atonement, didn't he effectively say, I do not want atonement, and with regard to himself, one should be able to do as he wishes? What then is the halakha?
Good. That's actually a really interesting point. So people will often, and I've got a class in a few weeks on this topic on a Sunday morning, will leave instructions regarding their burial and funeral before they die, verbally on their deathbed or in writing well in advance. What if the person says, I want you to leave me in the garden, on top of the ground, so that the birds and everybody else can have equal crack at me after I'm gone, right? Do we respect mom's wishes if she says, leave my body to rot on the surface of the earth? If it's not a mitzvah, then we know that honor your father and mother is a mitzvah. You would have to follow their wishes. If it's a mitzvah, it doesn't matter what mom said. I'm commanded by God to bury her. By the way, interesting aside from the weirdness of my own family, I actually have this case in my family. My sister, who is very environmentally minded, she's the chair of biology at an East Coast private university. She has instructed, not only does she want to be cremated, but she doesn't just want to be cremated and scattered or something like that. She wants to be cremated, mixed into a large beer, and thrown on the home stretch of Churchill Downs on the day of the Kentucky Derby. You can't make this up. Okay? She figures you can get in with a bag of dirt in your pocket, no one's going to bother you. They sell large beers anyways. People spill their beers, nobody would notice. She really wants her ashes in the home stretch of Churchill Downs. That's what she wants. She figures mixing into a beer and throwing over the rail is the best way to get that done, so she has left those instructions for us. I told her, Tammy, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be the one who does that for you. Not the least of which is because the Kentucky Derby is always on a Saturday, and intentionally pouring water into the ground is forbidden as a form of agriculture.
What about beer? You didn't say anything about that.
So, now my sister is not Jewish, as you all know. So theoretically, this could be done. It doesn't violate Jewish mitzvah. But if she were Jewish and she left this instruction, it would be very simple. The answer is no. There's nothing about that I'm permitted to do as a Jew with your body. And I am commanded to bury your body, and I'm going to do that. So when you have a parent or someone who leaves instructions that are contrary to Jewish law, the Jewish person observing Jewish law has to either be willing to do those things because mom said so, even though it's against the Torah, which the rabbis would never accept, or what they really should do is they should step aside and let somebody else in the family take care of that, and then say their Kaddish when the unpleasantry is all done, right? So you have to talk with people and say, well, what are your wishes? Please don't make me the executor of your will if you're asking me to do something I can't do, right? So if it's atonement, then you can't force somebody to do teshuvah. You can't force somebody to seek atonement. So if my sister is like, my sins are too great, or I did them on purpose and I don't want atonement, so throw me on Churchill Downs, I would be allowed to do that if it's atonement and I know she's not seeking atonement. I have no command to seek atonement on her behalf. So she can reject burial if the only reason to do burial is for atonement. She cannot reject burial if the purpose is that it's a disgrace and it's commanded, right? So those are two different things.
What happens if it's a sin to do it? I mean, it's a sin not to do it, amen.
Well, it's only a sin not to do it if you're commanded to bury. And that's what the Gemara is talking about. Are we in fact commanded to bury somebody? So in the case of disgrace, we're commanded to bury because if we don't, it's a disgrace and we're forbidden. But in the case of atonement, if we don't, they don't get atonement. So it's like somebody who skips Yom Kippur. Right? Yeah.
While you're on the issue of cremation, I mean, does one fulfill the mitzvah to do cremate and then bury the
Well, the question in the room is, can you fulfill the mitzvah of burial by cremating and burying the ashes? The answer is no. Once the body has been destroyed, there's no mitzvah regarding the ashes. So somebody who has the ashes in an urn above the fireplace, It's just an urn full of ashes. It's not a human body. There's no holiness associated with it. Well, I mean, it's like, if you wanted to burn the U.S. flag and then say that people have an obligation to treat the ashes with the respect to do the flag, it doesn't make any sense, right? It just doesn't make any sense. Same thing, if you were to burn a Torah scroll on purpose down to ashes and then say, I need to bury them because Torah scrolls need to be buried, it doesn't make any sense. So once you've cremated a body, the body is gone. So this usually comes up when there's an observant member of a family with an unobservant member of the family who has died, who has left behind the requirement of cremation. When does the observant member start sitting Shiva? Right? Because there's no burial. You normally start Shiva with burial. So if they burn the body and then inter the ashes, do you start Shiva when they burn the body or when they inter the ashes? When they burn the body. As soon as the body has been destroyed, there's no more mitzvah for burial. That's gone. You have eliminated the conditions for burial. So what I tell people, they'll say my mom's in Florida and they're cremating her on Tuesday and I don't know what they're doing after that. And I'm not going. I say, well, your Shiva starts on Tuesday, as close to the time of cremation as you can determine.
Just to cover all bases, how about when buried at sea? That's the same idea.
Buries what?
At sea.
Burial at sea?
Yeah, you just dump.
Yeah, you just dump a body into the ocean.
Yeah.
Not a preferred way of disposing of the body in Judaism. But again, in that case, the question is Yeush. Have you despaired of ever recovering the body? Right? So if somebody was in the World Trade Towers and the towers came down, for a day, people thought we were going to find survivors. It became very clear, aside from like one elevator shaft, which was particularly strong and located perfectly, there were no survivors. And it was a horrific event, and you weren't going to find anybody. After 2 or 3 days, there was a formal declaration of Yeush. And there's no survivors. Then the question is, do we wait until we find the bodies before we start sitting Shiva? And there was all this halachic conversation at the time of what do you do? How do you have a funeral with no body? What if they find the body later? What if they wind up being alive? I mean, how can you, and it was a terrible time. If once you're at a point that you have no reasonable ability to think you're ever going to see that body again, then at that moment your Shiva begins. Even if they find remnants later. Then you just bury with respect, but it doesn't start any new Shiva or anything.
Burn a body, does the bones also burn, becomes ashes?
Say it again?
When you burn a body, does the bones also burn and become ashes?
They cremate their usually bony chunks and chips in the pile of ash. So they put all the ash into a container, and if you were to sift it, you would find some solid pieces. But for the most part, it's all burned down to virtually nothing. And the truth is, they don't clean out the crematoria in between people either. So when they're scooping out the ash and filling a box, it's miraculous that every single person, regardless of what size they were, fits in the same box. The box of ashes you get from the funeral home they have a inventory of these boxes, and everyone comes out full. Just think about it. You got a 110-year-old, and you got a 110-pound person, and followed by a 350-pound person, and they both fit in the same box. These are the things that we don't really talk to with people in the moment of their loss, or anybody who has a box of ashes in front of them when we're talking. But for those of you making decisions far removed from any of this, please understand, they're not cleaning out the crematoria in between, and they're filling the box with ashes. So, there's a lot of reasons why I don't think it's the best way to go. Personally, I like a plain pine box put into soil with no barrier, preferably with some good moisture and animal life around, so that you have a healthy ecosystem and the buried body is going to become part of the healthy ecosystem of the earth. That's the best response to death, is contributing to life.
In New Jersey, we do not have that casing.
No, we do not have vaults in New Jersey.
I think at Beth Israel, because the grades were sinking, was a problem, so they had to put in cement vault. They actually had to kind of dig a open to the grade.
Well, what they have sometimes is a wall. They'll do like a cement rectangle around, but it doesn't have a bottom or a top, right? It just gives a little bit more support to the earth above. But the truth is, in any cemetery, wherever there's a grave, the ground is going to crush down. And then it's going to crush down again over time, and they're all going to get these little swales. And unless you're going out there and you're putting more earth on top of all the graves over time, and I mean over a year, 2, 3, 4 years, you're not going to have flat ground. This is a lovely conversation. I just remind you that it was in this month's Hayenu that there's only 32 graves left at King Solomon in our section of the cemetery. So if you haven't bought your plots, people are dying to get them.
Oh.
Already got mine.
The Gemara suggests, here's another Tashma. So we're going to try and learn it from somewhere else, this time from Kohelet. So Deuteronomy didn't work. They went to Kings, already a bad move. Then they went from Kings to Jeremiah. Now they're going to go to Kohelet. They really don't have a proof text if they're going into Kohelet, right? Because half of what Kohelet says he doesn't mean, right? But let's see. Okay, the Gemara suggests. Francesca, you're back.
Okay, the Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the fact that the righteous patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were all buried. And if you say that burial is required on account of atonement, the righteous need atonement.
All right, I love this argument. So now you're going to say that there was burial in the Torah, and the burial of the Torah was because of disgrace, then we know it's commanded. But if it was because of atonement, then it's not commanded. But how could you say it's because of atonement when we know that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were buried, and surely such righteous people didn't need atonement? Therefore, it wasn't for atonement that they were buried. Therefore, it must have been because of disgrace. Therefore, it must be commanded. Ha!
You more so for Rafa Leia.
Who? Who? They're only mentioning the guys. I can't help you.
No righteous people, everybody sins.
Oh, everybody sin. Okay, well, let's see. The Gemara says yes. Just what Morris just said. Go on, Francesca.
Yes, even the righteous are in need of atonement, as it is written, for there is no righteous person on earth who does good and never sins. Besides, my mother says there are no saints.
And so?
And so even the righteous need atonement for the few sins they committed over the course of their lifetime.
There you go. See, it could still be atonement, which means it's not a mitzvah, which is probably not where we want to wind up, but okay, here we are at this point. So now we'll try Tashma in another way. We're going to go back to the Book of Kings. So Tashma, maybe you should learn it from this. Go on.
The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the verse referring to Abiyah, son of Jeroboam.
Yeah.
Wait a second, I had to turn down the suit.
We're right back to the Book of Kings. It's the same verse we had before.
Okay. And all Israel shall eulogize him and bury him, for he alone of Jeroboam shall come to the grave. And if you say that burial is required so that the deceased should achieve atonement, these two, in other words, Jeroboam's other sons, should also be buried so that they should achieve atonement.
I see. So you said it can still be a mitzvah and for atonement because the ancestors who were righteous needed it for atonement. So it could still be a mitzvah. So let's go back to the verse from the Book of Kings and see if we can run that one as a proof that it's a mitzvah for atonement. And
if you say that burial is required so that the deceased should achieve atonement, these two, in other words, his sons, should also be buried so that they should achieve atonement.
Okay, so the verse only had this one guy, he alone, and if it was a mitzvah, it would have had to include the other ones who definitely needed atonement. Go on.
Gemara rejects this argument. This son, Abiyah, who was righteous, should achieve atonement through his death and burial. But these other sons who were wicked should not achieve atonement, even in death.
Aha, so we can do burial for atonement for righteous people, but not for the ones who really need it.
So would this mean that they would be buried just to have them, for health reasons, be buried in the ground, but there wouldn't be any religious service?
Just leave them where they drop. Watch where they drop.
Okay,
Just step over them.
just step over them and that's their problem.
Which of course is not the Jewish attitude, and we know that's not where it's going to wind up. Remember, Jezebel, one of the great disgraces in her death is that she was fed to the dogs. Right? I mean, this concept of leaving the body out is not for the righteous. Go on.
The Gemara suggests,
So here's another case. Jeremiah again.
come and hear a proof from the curse pronounced by Jeremiah upon the wicked. They shall not be eulogized, nor shall they be buried, which indicates that it is not on account of atonement that burial is required, as were that the case, the wicked are certainly in need of atonement, and therefore they should be buried. The Gemara answers, this is no proof, as Jeremiah's intention might be that the wicked should not achieve atonement.
Okay, so the Jeremiah verses says these people I'm cursing will not be eulogized and not buried. By saying these people that I'm cursing shall not be buried, you could learn that ordinarily wicked people would be buried. And therefore the wicked people should be buried for atonement. You could have taken it that way. But the Gemara says no. Jeremiah's intention might be that the wicked should not achieve atonement. And that's why he's saying they shouldn't be buried, and it should apply to all wicked people. Therefore, the question of whether burial is necessary in order to prevent disgrace or achieve atonement remains unsolved. We ran through all our verses. We ran through all of our logic. We came up with no definitive proof that there must be burial, either just because, or because of disgrace, or because of atonement, for good people or for bad people. We've come up with nothing. We spent a little time doing it, and it was fun. Moving on. Ibaelo, and it was asked of them. Go on.
A dilemma was raised before the sages. Is the eulogy delivered for the honor of the living relatives of the deceased, or is it delivered for the honor of the dead?
That's a good question, right? And every rabbi has had to ask themselves this question at some point. I'm going to say something in this eulogy that is really important because it's true about the person who has died, and it is something that the person who died was extremely proud of. But it will deeply offend one of the family members present to say it. Okay? I'll give a simple example. He thought that his second marriage was what God had always intended for him, and in his second marriage he found love and fulfillment. Right? Wife number one is in the front row with his children who came from her. Right? Yeah, I'm embarrassing everybody over there, right? But if he were to be asked, what was the best thing that ever happened to you? Where in life was your purpose most profoundly fulfilled? And his answer is, in my second marriage. Then what am I doing when I give a eulogy? Am I honoring him on his terms, or am I doing it for them? In which case, maybe wife number two isn't even invited to the funeral. I've seen that. I don't want that at the funeral. It's his wife. He married her when he was 85. His whole life was over here, and she's a blah, 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 blah. Right? And you know, the answer is, She's his wife. She has a mitzvah to be present for the burial just like you do, no matter what you think of that. We don't have a right to take that away from her. Well, then you make her sit over there and I don't want to hear a word from her.
She's a mourner, this
She's a mourner.
not the same as it is, but a type of mourner.
She's a mourner. She's a Kaddish relative. She's a mourner. She's a wife. She lost her husband. Have some Rachmanis. She's not a wife. There's no Rachmanis. She's a capital B. Right?
Yeah.
So we deal with this. It's a great question. Who is the eulogy for? The honor of the dead or the honor of the living? So the Gemara is going to answer the question with a question.
So the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference
Yeah.
between the two possible reasons?
Why are you asking the question? Does it really matter? Go on.
The Gemara answers, there is a difference in a case where one said before he died, do not eulogize that man, myself. If the eulogy is delivered to honor the deceased, he is able to forego this honor, but if it is delivered to honor the living, he is not, as it is not in the power of one individual to forego the honor of the other.
Okay, so again, all these things are known. These are very human. I know a case of a very well-known rabbi, worked in the pulpit his entire life, was extremely respected in the movement, beyond the movement, was a pillar of the city that he lived in. And I spoke with him during his lifetime. He was quite clear. When he died, graveside, no eulogies. Graveside, no eulogies. And that's what happened. Person served the Jewish community and thousands of families in their time of need. People were not notified of the funeral until it was over. And there was no opportunity for anyone to speak. Okay?
Probably obituaries about them.
There was a published obituary in the paper. You know, it took up a quarter page or something. So does that person have that right? Well, not if it's a mitzvah to give honor to the living, right? To tell the wife your husband was, to tell the children your father was, to tell the community your rabbi was, to tell the non-Jewish world in which this person lived and affected relations, we were able to be together because he, right? The lessons we have all learned that we must now carry forward are, right? All of that was taken away from the community. The life's work, the lessons and the charge to continue the impact of the person, that was all taken away from the community. Because this rabbi refused to allow eulogies or a memorial service or a public event of any kind. Why would the rabbi do that? Knowing the rabbi, I know why, but you don't know the rabbi, so why would a rabbi do that? Humility, everyone says. Yes, he's a tremendously humble person. I assure you, this rabbi was not humble. The truth of the matter was, it might have been atonement. When you give 20,000 eulogies, you've lied 5,000 times. At some point, right? And there's a kind of contempt is too hard a word, but there's a kind of contempt that grows in the soul of anybody who does the same thing 10,000 times. What is a eulogy? I've given 10,000 eulogies. And you come to the conclusion that what I do in these 5 or 10 minutes of a eulogy has nothing to do with the 90 years that Grandpa lived. And it's all just a thing. And at the end of my life, I hope my life has had the impact that it has. I don't need a eulogy for icing on the cake. I've done what I've done. I've been what I've spin, my life will have whatever it does, and I don't want someone to be forced into writing 10 minutes to try and summarize who I was, even, especially if it might wind up being some clergy who never met me, or some person who I never confided in, so they have no clue who I really was.
If this rabbi had been honored with various events while he was living, he heard various eulogies.
He always eschewed honors, never allowed honors. There's a great deal of ambivalence inside this rabbi about being recognized. And there is a sense of atonement, the concept that, I have not always said what I would want to say because I am a rabbi in a community. I have not always told a person what I think they probably needed to hear because I am a rabbi in a community. That can actually get in the way of being able to be that person's rabbi, right? Like if I were to I love picking on Ron because Ron and I are very comfortable and we love each other and I can pretend that I'm doing something terribly offensive to him and he knows in a million years I would never do anything it's like not what I feel towards you. I have admiration, friendship, and affection with you so I can do this, so he's a safe person. But let's say, I thought Ron was, and he's not, a terribly judgmental, racist schnook. Right? That's what I really thought about him. And for 30 years at B'nai Shalom, I said Shabbat Shalom and gee, Ron, you're the best. Right? And inside I was always snapping off the words, you racist snook, inside my head. Right? Now, obviously the Torah commands me to tell him if he's that kind of a person. Hochiach tochiach et amecha. It's a positive command to rebuke somebody who's breaking Torah law. Right? And being a racist is breaking Torah law. It's intolerable within Judaism, right? So, maybe for some reason I would go through a lifetime with somebody as a rabbi, and I would feel inside myself that I owe some kind of chet, I owe some kind of atonement, that I didn't do all I should have done with them. Or it could be sincerely, missing. Maybe he's not the problem, maybe I'm the problem, right? Maybe I didn't support him the way I should, or I didn't care for him the way I should, or I didn't follow through with him the way I should. Maybe I didn't teach him the Torah that I should have. He asked for it and I said no. I might have other things. And I don't want Ron to stand up and say, Rabbi Tobin was the greatest Torah teacher ever, he never said no. And inside I know 5 different ways I've avoided teaching him Torah. Right? It could be in me. So there's different ways why a person might say, I don't want you to eulogize me. A businessman who's held up as he was the most successful businessman ever, but he knows that he lied, cheated, and stealed in the first half of his career to get there. Right? He doesn't want people standing up and saying what a great leader of the business community is, because that person knows that he did something unethical, immoral, and wrong to get there. Right? So people who have ambivalence about atonement may not want eulogies. Right? Do we care? Right? Or is it better to just live with the lie for the honor of those who now will take the good lessons? Let him get an atonement in the ground for everything he did that was wrong, and let's take the good in the eulogy and hand it to the grandchildren and encourage them to be moral, ethical people living the life in light of their grandfather, and they don't need to know the rest. Right? What's the purpose? So, it's a difference where the person said, don't eulogize me, and if the eulogy is delivered to honor the deceased, he's able to forego the honor, but if it's delivered for the living, he is not, as it is not in the power of one individual to forego the honor of others. Okay, Francesca, alternatively?
Alternatively, the difference is with regard to whether it is possible to collect the eulogist's fee from the heirs. So money always gets
The family. Can I charge the family for the eulogy? Go ahead.
If the eulogy is to honor the dead, it is possible to collect this fee from the heirs, even against their will. But if it is to honor the living, they are able to forego this honor.
Okay, so this is also a practical matter in the modern rabbinate. If I have ever worked with any of you or anyone you will know that the member of the congregation will come up to me and say, Rabbi, thank you so much. That was such a beautiful eulogy. What can I give you for your time, trouble, and support? And my answer is, you're a member of B'nai Shalom, you've already provided for me, that's what membership means. And if you choose to give a gift to me, it goes to the college fund. If you choose to give a gift to the shul, it goes to the shul. You don't have to, it's entirely up to you, honest to God, we're good. That's the answer, right? Well, if it's a non-member, I tell the funeral home, put me on the bill. I don't even have the conversation with them. When they pay the funeral home for the casket and the limousine and the grave, the rabbi is on there as a line item, there's my fee, and if they don't pay the funeral home the money, they don't deliver the body. Right?
Actually, you pay for the grave separately.
You pay for the grave separately, because they buy the grave from the synagogue or the cemetery, whatever. But the funeral home, which has to prepare the body and sell the casket and deliver the body in the limo, they put me on the bill, and then they send me a check, and at the end of the year, they send me a 1099 for all the different funerals I did with them. By far the neatest, cleanest, easiest way to go. I'm also on their list to call me on my day off. So on Wednesday, if they have a funeral and they don't have a rabbi, they can call me and say, I've got an unaffiliated funeral, will you do it? And I'll say yes, and I'm on the bill. I go, I come back, I get a check. Right? So I can charge them. Right? But if it was for their honor, I can't force them to pay me if I'm there for them. Right? I can force them to pay me to take care of Dad, because I'm one of the people who's taking care of Dad. They could give a eulogy. They don't want to. They could bury him. They don't want to. They could drive the casket on top of their station wagon. They don't want to. Right? So they're paying people to do the things that they don't want to for Dad. That's totally legitimate. But if I'm doing it for them, I'm not supposed to charge them at all. Right? So in service to my members, I don't charge. Right? For non-members who want me to take care of Dad, they don't care about me taking care of them because they never met me before and they're not going to meet me after. Right? So they're really hiring me to take care of Dad. Fascinating how modern this stuff can be. Okay, another tashma. Let's try and figure this out. Is this commanded or not? And who is it for? Go on.
Okay, the Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the verse that states, and Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and weep over her.
Yay, we do care about women.
That's nice to know. Indicating that Sarah's funeral was delayed until Abraham returned from Beersheba to Hebron to eulogize her. And if you say that a eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, would they have unduly delayed burying Sarah due to Abraham's honor? The Gemara rejects this argument. It is satisfactory to Sarah herself that her funeral was delayed so that Abraham could be honored by eulogizing her. Since Sarah herself would prefer that Abraham eulogize her, there was no disgrace in waiting for Abraham to arrive.
Okay, so that's a little tricky. He's in Beersheba, she's dead in Hebron. It takes about a day to get there, so they could bury her today, or they could wait for him to arrive and bury her tomorrow with his eulogy. Right? So if it's for her, or if it's for him, right? Would they have delayed if it was for Abraham's honor? Would they, and that's not exactly clear what the force of that is, right? If you say that the eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, would they have unduly delayed burying Sarah due to Abraham's honor? That's like a rhetorical question. But the Gemara says no, it was enough that Sarah herself would have wanted the funeral delayed so that he could be honored by being there. So it's honoring her wishes that he be honored. So which is that? Is it honoring her or honoring him?
Both.
Yeah, this is a solution that doesn't really allow the question to be argued before solving it. It's a solution that just cuts across both ways. She would have wanted him for his honor. Okay? Another tashma. Where'd it go? Something wrong with this computer sometimes.
There we are, that's it. You lost it, you had it.
I had it.
It's only 47.
You gotta go back to 46 again.
There we go. Tashma, let's just try and get to the bottom of the page, and then we know we're starting 47a clean next time. Go ahead.
The Gemara suggests, come and hear a different resolution of this dilemma from the verse referring to Abiyah, son of Jeroboam.
Back to that one.
And all Israel shall eulogize him and bury him. And if you say that a eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, are these people, Jeroboam's surviving family, worthy of this honor?
There's a lot of sinners in this family, as we see in the next chapter of the book. So the concept is all Israel shall do the eulogy. If it's to benefit the people who don't deserve it, that makes no sense. So clearly it's for the benefit of the person who died. Okay? But the Gemara answers that by saying, it is satisfactory.
It is satisfactory to the righteous when other people are honored through them. Since that is their wish, they are eulogized even if their wicked relatives are honored as a result.
Yeah, the dead king would have wanted all of his grandchildren up there on the dais in their fancy robes, getting honors in the program, and all the people saying righteous, righteous, righteous. You know, they would have wanted that. So who are you really honoring? It's just like Sarah and Abraham. Another Tashma.
I just lost track. Oh, come and hear a proof from the curse pronounced by Jeremiah upon the wicked. They shall not be eulogized, nor shall they be buried. If you say that a eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, why should the wicked not be eulogized?
So if my father was, helter-skelter or whatever, but you're supposed to honor the living, you should still give a eulogy about the bad guy because it's going to honor me. So why wouldn't you honor them? Okay, go on.
As perhaps they are survived by righteous people who are worthy of this honor. The Gemara answers, it is not satisfactory to the righteous when they are honored through the wicked, and therefore they prefer that a eulogy not be delivered for their wicked.
So even if the eulogy is supposed to be for the living and not for the dead, in the case of the bad person who's not eulogized, it's because the good people are really not honored by giving eulogy for their evil, rotten, no good, lousy father. Right? That doesn't really honor them. Okay, go on.
So does this obligate the family of the lousy no goodnik to do the eulogy anyway?
They haven't resolved it. They seem to resolve it with Jeremiah saying you don't eulogize the bad person for the sake of the living, because the living are not honored in that way. So you seem to be off the hook. I have known people, most commonly it's the sad case of child abuse, where there's somebody who was raised in an abusive home, and their whole life they have, of course, not had to honor their father and mother because they have an abusive father or mother. And when the person dies, they say, Rabbi, here's $500, you go take care of it, I'm not coming. Right? I've gotten that before, where I'm the only person burying somebody because the kids hate this person because of how they were abused. Right? I don't give a eulogy in that circumstance.
It wouldn't make sense.
It wouldn't make sense. I say the prayers for burial. I say the prayers for forgiveness. I say the prayers with hope for eternity. I say the El Molei Rachamim, that they should have, eternity and be bound up in the bond of life. I do think that there's a kapara, there's an atonement that happens at death, right, where they come to meet their maker and there's a final accounting, and I'm going to pray that go well for them because, I don't want that to go badly for anyone. Ultimately, it's not in my hands, but I'll do what the tradition would have done. And even an evil person is still created in the image of God, and their body needs to be treated with the sanctity of a Torah scroll. Because they were created in the image of God. They abused the image of God in everything they ever did, but they were created in the image of God.
We learned earlier about that if the person was a blasphemous, the children should not say Kaddish, not even say El Molech.
Yeah, if the person was a blasphemer, right, and they were executed for that, yeah, they don't have Kaddish, they don't have El Molech, they don't sit public Shiva, they would still have private Shiva on their own, but nothing that engages the community in any way. But it says they don't sit. It says they don't mourn, they don't sit, they don't bewail, and they show up with the judge after and they say you did nothing wrong, etc., etc., etc.
In the case, would that be the same? Is that different than this?
I think there's a difference between the abusive parent, which is a private sin, as opposed to the blasphemer, which is a public sin. Right? But I would not require an adult child of an abusive parent to sit the Shiva or to say the Kaddish. First of all, you can't make people do anything. I would talk with them about what opportunity the period of Shiva might give them to bring closure to a tortured relationship. Right? And how a period of Kaddish, of transforming the lack of a parent they had in life into something positive and making a minion in the lack of the parent that they have in death, can they get to a reframing or a transformation of what it meant to not have a parent? They might be happier that the person's dead, right? Come to services and express your gratitude in the words of the Mourner's Kaddish. Yit Kadav Yikadash Rabba. Woohoo! God is great, God is big, God is magnified, God is sanctified. Like, we don't think of the Kaddish as a celebratory prayer.